Hello everyone, I'm your host Amanpreet. Welcome to the Toronto Live Off the Floor Talkback series. Today I'll be speaking with DJ, spoken word performer, community arts programmer, anti-racist educator, writer, radio geek, and grassroots advocate, Jemias DaCosta. Jams, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start off by asking you the first question. Just dive right in. What inspired you to begin your journey into spoken word? Did you have any role models, any particular life events that you'd want to mention?
I come from a lot of storytellers on both sides of my family. So it's kind of runs in my family. And I think in terms of my sort of step into that craft as a spoken word artist, it really was something I would do at home alone. And it wasn't until I sort of had connected with a larger community and I realized that other people like to listen to people doing this. And that was about 15 years ago. And yeah, it's always a very political landscape when you're engaging in spoken word. So it's right up my alley.
It's amazing. I'm so glad that, you got the courage and of course inspiration to spread your work because it is, I truly love it. I have seen your pieces and they're great. For someone who doesn't know or never has heard of spoken word poetry, you as a spoken word artist, how would you describe it to someone who's never heard of it before?
Again, I think it's about storytelling and hearing people's voices, hearing their authentic voice and the story that they have to tell. I think the spoken word that I prefer and that I appreciate to hear the most is when you can just really hear someone sharing that part of themselves with their audience. And yeah, those are the things that I really appreciate about spoken word.
It can literally go anywhere because it is poetry, right? And there's no limitations to it, and that's awesome. So I'm sure you may have had some performances or done some sort of gigs outdoors or, even just over Spotify, which is great. But I must ask, so far, what have you found to be, if anything, the most challenging part of being, an artist in Toronto in today's industry?
I think that Toronto is a really interesting place because it's such a hub of so many things, so many people, so many communities. Historically, it's always been that way, like long before colonization. Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Algonquin, and then a whole bunch of other people would converge here because it's along an ancient trade route. So there's a very particular energy here, but I think that Toronto has a notoriously cold attitude and kind of reputation. When I was younger, it was known as the Screwface capital, and that just referred to really judgy audiences and audiences that are hard to please and audiences that don't always necessarily show up. So, I think depending on where you stand and what communities you're connected to, you might see Toronto that way. And I've experienced Toronto in that way, but I've also experienced Toronto to be a beautiful place, a place where communities, especially grassroots BIPOC communities, especially cutie BIPOC communities, hold space for each other in a really beautiful and supporting and loving way. So I prefer to stay in the grassroots because of that, because it's not about capitalism. It's not about the hustle and the struggle it is about the struggle and there's a lot of work being done, but it's not in a capitalist framework. So I find it to be a much more supportive community to be working in rather than a mainstream. I've worked in mainstream radio, I've worked in mainstream media, and yeah, I just find that those when you're going into more of that mainstream, then you've got all of the unchecked capitalist tendencies that happen.
No, honestly, I couldn't agree more. Like, so with something like art, being such a competitive industry, you definitely will see the best of both worlds, right? Like, you have some good days and bad. But the point is that regardless of which, you create your art with a purpose. You started for a reason. And hopefully, like, that reason is what will allow you to carry forward. And of course, you're going to grow, right? Just have to,
Mhm.
and that's incredible. Thank you. Um, I think you briefly touched on this, but I guess I will ask if there was any particular, like, we talked about challenges. Has there been some single rewarding moment in your journey that had stood out and, kind of given you that push to like continue if times were tough, or just anything that you would want to mention?
Um, I think that one of the challenges I think that I've experienced as a multidisciplinary artist is um, wanting to work in multiple mediums, but people prefer, they know where you stand and they know how to categorize you as an artist. So, for a long time, I was hosting a radio show every week. And I would DJ on that show, but I was known for more of like the conversations that were happening. And for me, um, that wasn't my craft. I was doing it because I love engaging in conversations with people, and I really love holding space for those conversations. But my craft is music, and in particular DJing. So yes, I am a spoken word artist, but my passion and my heart is really with music and with DJing and playing local grassroots artists um, and really highlighting those artists who don't get the kind of exposure that the mainstream artists get. So I think, yeah, in terms of like what it is like to sort of move in between different crafts, that can be really tricky, and it can be really challenging to for people to take you seriously when your hands are in multiple places, and the work that you do is in multiple places. And especially when you're talking about music, there's again, like going back to capitalism and the way in which capitalism has shaped the music industry. There's a very particular expectation of anyone who's building a career in the music industry to have that drive, that hustle, and sort of by any means necessary. And um, there are a lot of gigs that I won't take. There are a lot of places I won't go if I know that my community wouldn't be welcome there. And yeah, I think there are just some choices. For me, I always think it's important to hold your politics um, aligned with your values, because we live in a time where that's just the way it is. Like your politics and your values kind of like they
Yeah.
intersect in this very particular way, and a lot of artists don't want to have their politics in the way, and I understand that. But for me, that is the main sort of challenge, is sort of navigating all of those things and still trying to hold space for myself, and like getting the jobs that can help to support me, but really just always making sure that I'm aligning um, in a good way like that.
That's very respectable. No, I really do appreciate that, because not a lot of artists do that, especially because like coming in, right? Like it's just like, okay, I want to build a name and I want to get there. I can do anything to get there, sort of that sort of mentality, right? But no, of course, morals will always be very important to be considered. So you did mention your DJing career, as I also stated in your bio. I want to also ask, in terms of DJing, like, where did the inspiration from that aspect of your passion come from? Was it like the same time around like spoken word earlier before, and what has sort of pushed you to like continue it with it?
I think again, I've always been a DJ. My father has a huge record collection of vinyl records that I have been playing since I was old enough to handle them. And I did start as a vinyl DJ back in the '90s, and um, it's just sort of a natural thing to like play music. And then when when in the '90s, when I learned about the craft of DJing and saw that, like, wow, you can like do that as an art form, like listening to music, playing music as an art form. And then of course I love hip hop. And so, I love turntablism, and I really appreciate the craft of what a DJ can do with sounds. And then when you get into production, and then you get into sampling, and then what you can do with sampling, all of those things, it's just a really interesting way in which music has evolved, and a really interactive way of listening to music that I just love.
I think this literally defines, turning your passion into a career. Like, it can't be said better than this, right?
Exactly.
You described that, your art as like political music movements based on a question we asked you. So you briefly touched on this as well, but I will, I guess, dwell deeper into this. So yeah, you described your art as political music movements. What particular topics do you hope to touch and inspire change towards with your work?
A lot of the things that I've talked about in my spoken word have to do with identity. I'm multiracial, so again, like that is a politic that I feel important to sort of hold space for. And there are a lot of things to unpack there, but it is always political. When you talk about your identity, you're looking at the intersections and the places in which you stand, and the locations, the privileges that you have, and the ways in which those privileges intersect with other experiences that you might have where you're not experiencing certain privileges and access. So that's a very, I guess you would say, central theme in my spoken word. And then also just looking at getting inspiration from ancestors prior to colonization. So looking at, decolonizing, but really going back and then going way ahead. And like, those are the things that really inspire me. I think for a long time I was kind of stuck in just like decolonizing and like, the age where I'm now, I'm still very interested in decolonizing, and I really feel like we're ready for it right now. Like, let's get it happening. But I'm also very interested in sort of time-space shifts, and the kind of cosmic energy that comes from connecting to our ancestors, but also the future. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I understand, like, touching upon the past mistakes that have happened, and of course looking toward a future where we can fix them or work towards change, right? And yeah, that's amazing. Can you please tell us more about your album cover and like the inspiration behind it? I believe it's Flint and Fire, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, I'd really like to hear more about that.
So that is artwork that my daughter did.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my daughter just graduated from OCAD this past, like when the school year ended, right as the pandemic was beginning. And I had reached out to her. She's actually quite a busy artist these days. And I was like, I really, really want your artwork. And so we just sort of talked about the meaning behind the title, Flint and Fire. And Flint is I'm on my mother's side, by my grandfather, I am Kanien'keha, which is Mohawk. And so Kanien'keha is what we call ourselves, and that translates to people of the Flint. And there are a lot of stories around Flint that relate to our creation story as well. And so just thinking about again, ancestors, and then fire is like something that I associate with my father's family. My father's from Jamaica, and I actually lived there for a while. And so just that fire, and so like the Flint and Fire was kind of the representation of that. And then so I had shared with my daughter, and then I was like, just whatever you come up with, I want to use. And then so she created that artwork, and it was, yeah.
I think that's lovely, like, sort of touching on your roots and family history about your identity while you speak of, identity and like how we can like work towards changing that in terms of today's society. Wow, that's amazing. I'm so glad I asked that. I have no idea. Um, Touching in one of your pieces, like, my personal favorite from what I've heard would be the creation story. Because, I just found it to be so sheerly inspirational. I remember that one line, which was like, the turtle knew that the boy needed her.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to know what was your inspiration behind this piece and like, just more about it.
Sure, it was the woman, because it's the Haudenosaunee creation story. So this is not a story that I wrote. This is a story that is passed down from generation to generation. I learned the story from an elder named Grafton Antone, who was a language teacher that I was really lucky to get to learn from, maybe about 15 years ago. And so the Haudenosaunee creation story is about Sky Woman. So Sky Woman is falling from Sky World. And this was a poem I wrote back when I first learned the creation story from Grafton Antone, and my daughter was quite young. And I didn't write a lot of children's poetry, but this one sort of just came to me. So it's completely inspired from the creation story and then just sort of written simply to tell it to my daughter. And so Turtle knew that woman needed her. And that's the story of Turtle Island, which you may have heard. North America is referred to by a lot of Indigenous people as Turtle Island, and that refers to not only the Haudenosaunee creation story. There are other creation stories that, and many other creation stories that don't have turtle, but a lot of them do. So, yeah.
Amazing. So of course, like all of your pieces are near and dear to you. They all come from a place of love. But is there a single one that has stood out to you and like, something that you want to mention from all of your work? Yeah.
Well, I also love that, love that piece because I really love what I got to work with Xolisa, Jerome as the producer of that track of the whole album, and I had wanted to sing. I that's another thing that I've always done, but haven't really done in front of a lot of people for a long time, and it was really great working with her, and I really love what she did with the piece, and I love the way the soundscape of it. It's just a very soothing song, and then it was really exciting for me to get to do those vocals, but in terms of the other pieces, I think the one that is nearest and dearest to my heart is like my story, and that is this is not a post-racial poem, and that's just kind of like my story from my childhood and what it was like. It's not a remarkable story, but it's my story, so it is near and dear to my heart.
I'm definitely going to have another listen after understanding where it comes from, for sure. I also want to touch on the fact that, you mentioned to us that the emotion that you create most from is love, right? Mm-hmm. Do you find it challenging to create from a place of love when you're experiencing feelings of pain or hurt?
I think that love is the centering sort of anchor emotion that I love, and gratitude. When I'm struggling with, all kinds of things, just existing in this world can be really challenging. And especially when you are committed to, that decolonial work and committed to anti-racist work. It's very draining. It can be very, you can feel, hopeless sometimes, but the anchor for me is remembering to be grateful and to sort of center that gratitude and love. I find that's when I feel the most like myself. It's easy to get into, and the people who know me know that, I get fired up easily. I get angry about a lot of the things that are going on in the world, and sometimes, that's the voice that people are hearing first. But really, for me, the voice, the energy that I hold closest and that I know that I create from is when I am centered in that love and that gratitude.
It's always great, yeah, because essentially all of the work does come from the heart, right?
Yes.
It's very difficult to pick and choose, but no, it's always great. This is kind of cliche, but I must ask, where do you hope to see yourself 5-10 years down the line?
I struggle with that question because I think it's impossible to think about the future selfishly. So what I would really love to see is, a more just world where people are radically loving each other and supporting each other, and and the barriers that we know exist now are and we see them slowly crumbling, but like to see those gone. And I would like to see that justice that is so elusive for so many. I would like to see that. Personally, I see myself just continuing as I've been, and continuing to go and continuing to do the things on the side, whether, and sometimes up front, like DJing, but, those are things that I will always do. And then also make room for the other work that needs to be done as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, I understand completely. Well, with that question being answered and everything, I guess this is sort of more so on like your legacy. I think kind of relates, but I would love to know what legacy, if any, would you like to leave behind, and see it continue to remember DJ Jams, anything.
Well, I am a mother. I have a 23-year-old now. I think that's quite a legacy right there, and one that I'm really proud of and so grateful for. So definitely my daughter. I hope that if, when I'm gone, people will, remember that I was a part of these communities doing this work, and, trying to spread a little love and play some good music for people. And yeah, just trying to be, yeah, I think that's it. I'm okay with that.
That's so sweet.
Mm-hmm.
It was just awesome getting to know you today. I really, truly learned a lot. Is there anything you would like to say to the audience, or a little message you'd like to leave behind for them about yourself, or anything that...
Well, I just want to say thank you to you for taking the time to speak with me, and thank you to CJRU. Thank you to Xolisa.
Thank you, Jams, for joining us today.